Welcome to Design for Learning, a podcast from Notre Dame Learning. I'm your host, Jim Lang. A unique feature of American higher education has always been the strong commitment that many colleges and universities make to general education courses, or gen eds, or sometimes called core courses. Students in other countries often focus on their specialties from the very first semester of college, taking classes that only lie in that narrow path, like history or engineering or chemistry. The premise of gen eds is that students should not necessarily jump directly into a major, but instead have the room to learn and explore a variety of fields. Case in point, I came here to the University of Notre Dame as a first-year student, intending to major in classical languages, a subject that I had loved as a high schooler. But I ended up graduating with majors in English and philosophy, in part because of required general education courses. While these courses provide great growth opportunities for students, they can be challenging to teach. With a few exceptions, most students in a gen ed course are there to fulfill a graduation requirement, not because they actively chose to take that class. That means the teachers have to do extra work to convince students that the course will be worth their time. How do teachers make the best possible case for a required course? How do they make it a good experience for the students who may never return to the subject when the semester finishes? Today's guest has written a memoir teaching a general education course focused on a single semester. We're going to discuss how he thinks about and responds to questions like these. Carlo Rotella is a professor of English, journalism, and American studies at Boston College. He writes regularly for the New York Times Magazine. His work has also appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, and the Best American Essays. He's written books about cities, boxing, blues, and literature and film, among other subjects. His latest, What Can I Get Out of This? Teaching and Learning in a Classroom Full of Skeptics, describes what happens in the classroom. Welcome to Design for Learning, Carlo.
Well, thanks for having me.
So tell us about Lit Core. So you've written this fascinating book that's almost like a biography of a college course. And it really resonated with me since I've taught a similar course for many years at Assumption University. It was called Intro to Lit. And so before we get into the obstacles and successes of the course, so just tell our listeners about it. What's the course like? How many times have you taught it? Who takes it and why?
So, as it's called, Lit Core, Literature Core at Boston College is the required. There's two required classes in English. One is a required writing class, and this is the required literature class. So this is for most students their first and last college level literature course. There's many sections of it taught every semester by all kinds of people, from full professors to graduate students. And each section has its own reading list and its own theme. And the idea is to just get an introduction to reading, interpretation, and criticism of literature. I've taught it for years in various forms. At the moment, actually, I'm teaching a different version, which is for students who are English language learners, an MLL section. But there's various ways of teaching it. But almost everybody has to do it. And I think everyone should do it. You can place out, I think, if you get high enough on your AP class. And I think that's actually not a good idea. I think everyone should encounter this class at some point. They either do it in their first or their second semester.
So why did you choose this class to write about?
Partially because it is required. So that it's full of people who do not think of English as their specialty. Even if they got good grades in English in high school, they're often quite suspicious of both the mechanics of interpretation and the value of interpretation. So it really kind of forces you as a teacher to reach way down into your chops to not only teach the craft of extracting meaning from books, but also to really explain clearly why we're doing this, what value it has, what the point of this is, and what you might do with it elsewhere in life, which I think is a really good exercise. And, we're used to, especially if you teach graduate courses and advanced electives, we're used to sort of teaching fellow committed people, and it's good to have a class of civilians, basically draftees, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah. So in the book, you actually talk about your first day, and so you had the book walks through the semester, right, from start to finish. Of course, this was a semester in which the pandemic happened, so there's a big shift in the middle of it. And we could talk about that too. But you really talk about your first day of the semester. You sort of make that chapter about making the pitch to students. So make that pitch to us. Like, I'm a first-year student in your class. I've been drafted in this class, as you say. And how are you going to convince me that this is a worthwhile endeavor for me?
Well, and as I said, so I should just preface this by saying what I did is I interviewed all the students for a couple years, so mostly in their junior and senior years, talking about their freshman year. So it's not just, we're not just inside my head. Also, we can move around and be in other people's heads. And one of the things that really emerged from the interviews really strongly was the level of skepticism in the room, especially on the first day. And as I said, that skepticism about what the value of this is, but also skepticism about the mechanics of interpreting literature. That these are people who got A's in high school English, but still kind of believe that the interpretation of literature is either magic or bullshit, right? And so, and we're suspicious of people who talked a lot in their English classes, or resentful, or admired them, right? And so, so we need to move on both of those fronts. So on the mechanics front, it's, to just demystify the whole idea that you need to be brilliant to do this. If you can read, you can come up with an evidence-based argument for meaning in a text. So it's about pattern recognition, about just noticing things to start with, noticing word choice and imagery and repetitions and structure and all those things, and then connecting form to theme, basically, right? This is a class that can be reduced to 3 words on the craft level. Form expresses meaning, right? If you can get that, right, we can get somewhere. And then on the what's the value of this, that's the pitch. That's really, we all do this, and we need to do this as citizens, as workers, as people. We need to extract meaning from the world around us and build arguments for that meaning based on evidence. And we do this with, as I point out, then we do this with the State of the Union address. We do this with the state of our neighbor's yard. Like, he's always got a car up on blocks in his yard. He must not care about his neighbors, right? We're close reading that yard when we do that, right? So, and to say, like, you need to be able to do this. What things mean is extremely important in your life. And in fact, I would argue most people who have a career look at your job. The salary tells you one thing, but what that job means, which you can understand by close reading what you do all day and how people respond to you, probably means more. What it says about you as a person and what you're doing with your life and what you mean to other people. So it's sort of the argument saying, look, this is a basic human skill, and you need to be good at this, and we're going to practice on artifacts expressly designed to carry meaning. So we know it's going to work, right? And then later in life, this is going to be a lot trickier because you're going to be working with all kinds of other artifacts, right? But you already do this. You do this with the lyrics of a Taylor Swift song. You do this with like cryptical comments that your aunt makes about your cousin's shirt. You do this now. Let's get better at it. We got 15 weeks. We have 2,000 minutes together. Let's get better at this.
Yeah. And so, when you think about the purpose of a gen ed class and the way you're describing it right now, we could focus on the sort of high level skills like interpretation, finding meaning in things, which actually sort of absents you from the actual subject of the course, like literature itself. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, do you feel like, is there something special about literature that, draws you to it, that believes, like, you want students to actually keep reading literature after this, or do you care about that or not? Yeah.
So I'm aware of that argument, and I believe that argument, but I tend not to lean on that argument that it will like make your life more beautiful, man. Like I believe that that's actually true, but I kind of try to argue from utility, right? But there is an argument specifically for using literature for this, that it's kind of a storehouse and a laboratory for trying out ideas. The theme of this course was the misfit, the social misfit. All the books were about misfits. So this is a chance to keep asking versions of a question that any 18-year-old is going to be interested in asking, which is, what's the fit between the self and the order, the society this person is misfitted to, and how do you deal with that? Do you accommodate yourself to the possibilities, or do you try to find a new set of possibilities, right? So we're always asking, what's the nature of the fit between self and order, and what should be done about that? And that's an evergreen subject for 18-year-olds, right? So, I do think that the fact that it's literature matters, but I also don't want to rest on this sort of default setting that a lot of English professors have settled on, which is it'll make your life more refined or more beautiful, even though I think that's actually true.
as I do. Yeah. So I agree with you on that one. But let's talk about the thing I really want to focus on today, which is about student participation and engagement in a class. And there's a lot in the book about, there's a whole chapter about particularly two particular students who had trouble engaging and participating. You talk a lot about on your first day about why it's so important to participate and engage in class. And in fact, the theme of misfits even comes up in relation to this as well, because you say at the start of the semester, listen, you might think you're the one person who's shy about participating in class, but in fact, most of you feel this way. It's
Yeah.
hard for you to participate in class. And so let's think a little bit about why this is so important, such an important value for you as a teacher, and how do you make that pitch to them on that first day again?
Yeah. So, and this is sort of, this is a version of form following function, right? Policies, the class policies should reinforce what's most important about the class. And so there's a whole argument for this, obviously. And I won't give you the long version, but the shorter version is what's unique and precious about college is increasingly the other people in the room. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for the admissions policy and you're paying for the hiring and promotion policy. And that's it. Everything else, at least theoretically, you could do at home naked, right? Theoretically, you could read books and watch lectures on YouTube about books or listen to this podcast. And you could have opinions that you fire off into the electronic void. You could do all that. But what you can't do is meet 75 minutes twice a week with a bunch of people who've all read the same thing and try and extract meaning from it by paying attention to this book and to each other. So the two main policies, one is no devices in the classroom. Everything's hard copy. And the other one is in order to qualify for any grade at all, you need to be a regular contributor to our discussions. And that means, we should hear from you at every class. Now, there were 33 students in this class, so that's fairly daunting. And they were very clear about that policy made them nervous, and it also made them do the reading. Because as more than one said, I didn't want to sound like an idiot. Which is, their great fear is that they'll sound like an idiot. So, and it's important to note, various teachers do say class participation is important, and they say, X% of your grade is connected to it. But I think that makes it overly subjective. So I take the other approach, which is just to set the bar very high, and all you have to do is get over the bar, which is to say, in order to pass the class, you need to be a regular contributor. And then I'm not going to worry too much about whether you were great or okay in class participation. Right. Yes, if you were particularly great, that helps your grade. But the idea is to just move it up to, this is where citizenship needs to happen, is you need to be a participant. And it has all kinds of consequences like doing the reading, but it also, even if you're faking it, even if you're pretending to be interested enough to participate, it does require you to ante up. It does require, you can't just sit there with your arms folded for 15 weeks and say, impress me. You have to, at some point, put yourself on the line. And that does tend to lead to grudgingly or less grudgingly saying, okay, what are we talking about? What's the subject? What are we trying to accomplish? Fine, I'll participate at least a little. And it's that kind of buy-in that produces citizenship. And I love citizenship as a model for being a student because it comes with both obligations and rights. And that's why I really like it as a model for being a student.
And thinking back about the whole book, I think two very sort of common themes are this class will help you develop these skills of interpretation and finding meaning and form, but then also, speaking and hearing your voice heard in class and engaging in these conversations, being a citizen of the community, right? I mean, those seem like to me like really strong values for you as a teacher, right?
They are, and they're getting, only rarer and more precious as time goes on. I mean, weirdly, every educational advance makes face-to-face teaching and learning more cutting edge. It's like MOOCs, then Zoom, then AI. It's just putting more and more pressure on the face-to-face classroom as this place where you do something that you really don't get to do elsewhere in life more and more. And so I do think that if you're in a room with 35 people, there's 33 students, a TA, and me, right? If you're in a room with 35 people, you're all trying to solve a problem together. You need to participate, or else, if this was your job, you'd be fired, right? If you didn't participate. But if you dominate, then you're going to prevent other people from contributing, right? So that it's this fairly complicated social interaction in which together we define a problem, solve a problem, that generates a new problem. We move on to that problem. We get stuck. We back up. We go around. That's really an invaluable experience, and it's getting harder and harder to have that experience in any other setting, right? Because we're, the very large companies with a lot of money are really eager to push that whole experience online, and it's very different online. So I really think more and more that's kind of the value of the class. My most important objective on the first day is to make sure everybody speaks, if only to introduce themselves so that everyone becomes a person who has spoken in class as quickly as possible.
I love that phrase you use. Everyone will be someone who has spoken in class, right? They're going to become that person very early in the semester.
Yeah.
Now, we might think about the strategies that you use to do this. And so, if I was expecting to, read a memoir from someone who is, this is a real strong value for them. And they have all these little tricks and techniques they're going to use to get students talking, like, different active learning strategies. But you're more like, kind of, I don't know, not sort of like ad hoc, kind of like you're working with students and just trying to draw them out and inviting students to talk and just making it I guess like an expectation of the course. So tell me about that. In fact, I just was reading yesterday, which you're talking about using great small group work, which you
Yeah.
say you use occasionally, but not that much really. And so mostly this is just like open discussion with students.
Yeah, exactly. And I am no virtuoso of small group work, I have to admit. I should do it more. And I like it when I do it, but I think there's something about putting your hand up. And I don't go around the room, and make people like, you have to put your hand up. There's something about putting your hand up in front of all those people and saying, I actually have something to say, And so, but if I'm going to require that, then it's also on. So if it's on you, the student, to have something to say, it's on me to really work with the whole group and say, this is how you generate something to say. Here, let's think about how you're actually going to say it. And definitely it's on me if a student falls silent to work with that student to make sure that they get in the game. So, but you're right. I do say to the students, it's on you to have something to say. And then I try to help them come up with something to say. Right. And if they fall silent, then I've got a whole routine. I call them into my office and we talk about, okay, what's the problem? And it was interesting to hear what the problem is. Sometimes the problem is just, I'm terrified to speak in front of people, but sometimes it's, I can't time the conversation. It's just going too quick, or I'm always getting preempted by other people, or, I like to talk this way and not that way. And one of the things I do tell the class, I spend a lot of time in the fight world, in the boxing world. And I tell them in the fight world, they say styles make fights, right? Which means that it's actually more interesting when you have a puncher against a tactician, right? And it's like, styles make fights in a classroom too. So do you like to ask questions? Do you like to answer questions? Do you like to go first? Do you like to hang back and counter? Do you like to help arrive at an agreement, or do you like to undo agreements, right? Think a little bit about what's your optimal way of participating. And it is difficult for them, and I do feel for them. And I'm also, the worst kind of zealot, which is I'm a convert. I didn't talk basically from middle school through the end of graduate school. So I feel their pain, but I'm going to cause them that pain anyway, because I think it's invaluable. I mean, I will say that I have the job I have because I took a class in college and the professor made everybody talk. And that's why I ended up doing what I do.
Yeah. And I think, so I'm the same way. I was a convert also. I didn't speak that much in class. Actually, a couple seminars here and there where things was much smaller. But for the most part, I tried to keep my mouth shut.
And write good papers.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. But I feel the same way. In fact, when I give workshops and lectures on teaching now, I always say my core values as a teacher are every voice matters, and I want to hear it in the room. And I understand that people will sort of have a couple things that now give some responses that people will sometimes come back at that statement with. The first is, what about having people participate, through like, other forms, just by writing things down in their own notebooks or emailing you afterwards. So again, let's respond to that one first.
So I do some of that. So I do a weekly reading response, like 300 words. I don't grade it. It's just, and it's just as soon as you finish the reading, I have a prompt, and the prompt is totally based on having done the reading. There's no extra thinking required. It's just like a paragraph to kind of get your thoughts in order. It's due a few hours before class, so I can quickly look them all over before I go into the room. And I make clear that is not a miniature paper. That is actually more formal class participation, right? So so everybody has that, and it's also a good pump primer. I say just feel free to quote your own paragraph in class, right? So there's that, and and different students are different. And I also recognize that, some people just need to talk a lot and some people don't say as much. And that's fine. That's why I made the point earlier about setting the bar more of a pass fail bar instead of
Right.
like, constantly myself subjectively judging the quality of participation, because it's different. And sometimes some person will just say one thing and it turns out to be really valuable, and so that's harder to measure.
So there's sort of like a baseline participation. Everyone will do that. This written expression before the class
Everyone
in,
does
in
that.
response to a prompt. Yeah.
And then
And so let's
the other thing I try to do is, especially when we start a conversation, you can just notice things, right? You
right.
don't have to have an interpretive point. You can just say like, well, this word, I noticed that, or this image showed up twice, or I noticed the first paragraph was really long. Like, you really don't have to start with meaning. You can just start with I noticed form. And that bar lowering, I think, also gets people involved because, in the field that they suspect that what you really want is a fully baked interpretation of the text. And they don't believe that you're really saying you can just notice something. So you have to reinforce it when you hear it. Say, this is great. We're making a pile of these observations, and then we'll work on the pile together.
Yeah. So the other response then is, okay, there's certain students who really struggle with speaking in class, and you have a chapter in your book which addresses two of these students who were not speaking at all for the first several weeks of the semester.
Yeah.
And so tell us how you responded to Kathy and Colleen.
So that I have a kind of routine, which I've had a lot of success with. I don't know if it works for every single possible student, but it's worked pretty well, which is call them into my office, say, hey, listen, first send an email, like, remember, you are supposed to participate if you want to pass the class. Then call them into my office, we talk about it, and we come up with a plan, and the plan is usually, here's the first question I'm going to ask on Thursday. Why don't you just write out a response? Just prepare something in advance. You can memorize it, write it out, whatever. I come to class with notes. Why shouldn't you come to class with notes, right? And then I'm going to call you. Put your hand up. I'm going to call on you first, and let's just rip the Band-Aid right off. We'll just get it out of the way, and think a little bit. Do you want to sit in the back row so that nobody can see you? You want to sit in the front row so you can't see anyone? Are you happy where you are, or whatever? And then, and that generally tends to break the ice enough, right? Some people are so paralyzed that you have to take another page out of the basic, behavioral psychology textbook, and you can actually just rehearse it in my office. I ask the question, the student sitting there by herself raises her hand. I call on her. She answers it. I say, that was an excellent answer. Let's do it again. I ask the question. She raises her hand. If you were in a band or if you were on a team, that's exactly how you would handle the problem, right? You're like, hey, we're just not getting the pick and roll right. Let's just run the pick and roll 50 times, right? Or this entry, the woodwinds are coming in too quickly. Let's just work on measure 36, and that really works, right? And that's just basic behavior modification, right? And what Colleen in particular said to me afterwards. So they both started participating in class because of this. And Kathy actually, when we rehearsed it and did it, and she spoke first, she put her hand up 20 minutes later.
I remember that passage. Yeah, the book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to resist running across the room to high five her. But what Colleen said that really stuck with me is she said, "Look, I'm also quiet in my relationships to other people, and speaking in this class led to me speaking in other classes. But I also learned that, like, if I want to have a conversation with someone, I can just say something at the beginning, and then let them talk." And that just gets the conversation going. And look, Colleen wanted to be a teacher. Speaking in class was the job she wanted to do. This was an enormous hurdle, and it really was very little work for me. I sent her an email. We had a 20-minute conversation in class. I had a little note on my class note saying, Colleen, if she raises her hand, call on her first. That's it. And it's life-changing for her, as it was life-changing for me to be forced to speak in a class.
Yeah. So these strategies essentially that you're using are ones we can use to reach out to students who are not necessarily don't feel comfortable speaking, and then help them draw them into the classroom conversation. And we know both from our own experiences, but then also having many students have been through this process, it can have after effects on their college education. In fact, you talk about them interviewing them a couple years later and how they had changed and had learned to speak more in future classes
Right.
after what you had with them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in general, that's part of a larger theme that came from the interviews too, which is the students' attitude towards their freshman selves. When they talked to me, was like, "Oh my God, I was such a rookie," you know, like I didn't know how to do college, you know, and by the time they're juniors and seniors, they just have a much better sense of how to do this. So I think it's important to remember when you're teaching freshmen, you're also teaching freshmen, you know, how to college basically, and that's part of it. It's like, you know, you can say to them, look, speaking up in class, it's a great idea. You're much more engaged. Professors really reward that. If you do it a little, you can do it whenever you want to. It's just a technique thing.
Yeah. So the idea of, again, having these larger goals for a gen ed course or a core course, something like that, of interpretation, participation, and engagement. You're trying
Yeah,
to draw these students into these particular these values that are really important for you as a teacher. And I remember something you said in the book, which is, it would have been so much easier for me to just sort of let those students be like, you talk about the idea that previously you would have said earlier in your career, students can do what they want. It's up to them to choose or to participate or not. But you had a shift at some point to say, you know what? No, actually, I have a job here, and my part of my job is drawing them in. And so what caused that change for you, in the
yeah.
course of your teaching career?
That's a many factor analysis, but some of it is just getting older, having kids, my kids being of college age. You know, oddly, now that I'm more than 3 times the age of a freshman, I have a better idea of what's in their heads than I did when I was just twice their age, and that's in part because of my kids. But also, it's really important to add that this is not selfless. And I know that when you've got a class with like a couple of students who are really engaged and a lot of students who aren't, it drains your energy to even think about that class, let alone to teach that class. You're like, oh, geez,
Absolutely.
these people again, you know?
Right.
Whereas building community, you could just think of it for all the many reasons it's good for the students. You could think of it purely selfishly. There is nothing that makes teaching more joyful than having a genuine community of inquiry where everybody's anteed up and everybody's engaged. I think I say at some point in the book, what dictates the quality of a discussion class is where the floor is, not where the ceiling is. There's always going to be 2 or 3 great students, and if there's 2 or 3 great students and everybody else is sitting there resentfully hating them in silence, it's a drag, right? Whereas if everyone's in and doing their best, the class flies by. You come in with minimal notes. You trust them. They trust you. They trust each other. And you're like, it's Tuesday again. I get to see my friends, my colleagues. There's an
Right. Right.
enormous difference.
Yeah. So let's talk about 2 last things here. The first one is about the students who do speak a lot. And so how do you handle that student that just wants to jump in every time,
Yeah.
wants to talk a lot? I mean, what do you do with that student?
So I get asked that a lot, and it's not as big a problem as people seem to think it is. So I mean, yes, there are students who want to talk a lot, and sometimes, I've got this look that, and I'm sure you have one too. That look that you give a student when they raise their hand again that says, "I appreciate you raising your hand again, but we're going to wait and see." Right. So there's the people who want to talk frequently, and that's pretty easily handled by calling on other people and by saying occasionally, "Hey, like, let's not get in the habit of always just waiting for Wilson to bail us out here." He's willing, he's capable, but let's, and I'll say, "Wilson, you understand, of course," and he always does. So there's that move too. But the more challenging one is students who take a long time to get to the point, or who don't have a point. And there it's sort of I do have to I have to be kind of vigilant, ready to jump in and say, like, okay, so I think you're raising, to interrupt them basically and say, this is what your point is, in order to move things along. Now, that said, there are times when a student will kind of be wrestling with something, and I think it's good to model that. Like, she'll say, I hate this character. I just hate him. And it's worth saying, well, let's just stop and ask, how is the book a machine for producing your hatred of this character? Is it word choice? Is it the plot? Is it the diction? Is it what the character says? What is it you hate about this character? And if it's like, he reminds me of my uncle, okay, we can cut that short. Not that that's uninteresting, and we can say, well, this is a readerly strategy to compare what you're reading into daily life. But if it says, like, well, like, look at this sentence, and you're like, well, there's two reptile images in that sentence, So now we're talking about literary form, right? So sometimes I will let a student flounder if it's like good modeling of floundering and it leads to something.
So the idea of, the problem of the student who talks too much is not so much a problem if you've done all the preventive work at the start of the semester. Say it's important for everyone to speak. That's the
Yeah,
baseline, and this is a value that everyone has to sort of embrace. And that
yeah,
student that has to, well, then it's easier to go to that student and say, listen, more people need to have room in the space in the room to share their own voices.
yeah.
And so I think that makes sense to me.
And you can also phrase that positively. You can also
Yeah.
say, "Hey, listen, I notice you're absolutely like great on just jumping in at the beginning of the conversation. So, for the reasons that you just described, I'm going to ask a favor of you. I want you to, and I think it'll also help you. Like, let's think about doing a little more counterpunching. Like, let other people start, and then see and work on crafting your response from what other people have said, rather than I know you're coming in with a lot of notes, and I know you're coming in with a well marked up text. This is a useful skill, and it will be a useful skill in whatever you do next. You know?
Yeah. And this kind of these sort of like comments to students, and it really comes off in the book. You have a very gentle way of coaxing students into the classroom participation, and so it's wonderful to read all that. And last question here is a simple one. You don't fear silence. Why not? You don't fear silence in the classroom.
Yeah, it's not radio. It's not TV. It's not dead air. We're not here to entertain you. So I think a good ruminative silence is is a good thing. And I also I think we should not fear getting stuck. So and let me add that students really fear silence in the classroom. I
Yeah.
mean, their greatest fear is that they will say something and then there will be a yawning silence in which no one says a word. And it's so embarrassing what they said that nothing can happen next, right? So when we have a silence, I say, okay, are we stuck? Let's, since modeling is what we do best and it's most effective, like, what do you do when you're stuck? What are we stuck on? What's the nature of the problem that we're stuck on? Do we need to redefine the problem? Do we need to go find more evidence? What should we do? And a nice long pause, it has that effect. And the other thing about it, and this is why I try to legislate the occasional pause. Like, every once in a while when I ask a question, I say, okay, on this one, how about everybody just like jot down a couple thoughts for a minute, and then we'll continue. And that allows the people who have fewer fast twitch, mental muscles, to, who often have deep things to say, but need to cook it a little bit, because we're always rewarding the quickest, glibest, the people who hit the Jeopardy buzzer first, right? So the other thing about a pause is it sometimes gets other people in the game, but it's not dead air. And I think that's really important, especially that's important for novice teachers, I think, because they're so, what they do is they panic and answer their own question. And it's like the first pause is an opportunity for you to prove to the class that you are not hiding the answer behind your back. And it's like, well, if we're stuck, we need to get unstuck because we're not cowards and fools, right? So let's get unstuck, right?
Yeah, so you just mentioned novice teachers. So let's finish with this, actually. So this is a memoir, a biography of a class. It's not an advice book for teachers necessarily, but let me ask you, sort of final thought about this engagement and participation piece. What's your best piece of advice for a new teacher who's concerned about having participation in a course and getting students engaged in a discussion-based course?
Well, I do think that the first 2 weeks of the semester are the whole thing. If a student doesn't talk in the first 2 weeks, they won't. And if you don't prove that you are willing to wait, right? In other words, it's sort of a trust fall. It's like I tell them I do not have 75 minutes of lecture, and the thing that we're doing in here together is the main event, and the midterm and the final are about what we're doing with the text in class, right? That this class happens in two places. It happens with you off by yourself reading, and it happens with us together, right? And the midterm and the final are about what we did in class with the reading. So this is it. This is the main event. And I'm not a trial lawyer. A trial lawyer should always know the answer to any question they ask in cross-examination. If I know the answer, I'm just going to tell you the answer, right? I've taught some of these books before. And every time I teach them, we come to a different understanding of their meaning because there's a different group of people in the room. And you got to prove that. You have to show them that you are not hiding the answer behind your back. And that to me is the most important thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great pitch. Okay, the book is called What Can I Get Out of This? It just came out earlier this year. Is that right?
It came out in September.
September 2025.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I definitely recommend it. A great, sort of thoughtful reflection on a gen ed class. And so thanks for joining us today, Carlo.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Designed for Learning is a production of Notre Dame Learning at the University of Notre Dame. For more, visit our website at learning.nd.edu.